All right, welcome to Recovery Fitness for Recovery Talk. This is Yana, and I'm here with the wonderful Amanda, or Mandy. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to have you and have this really important conversation. A couple of weeks ago, Matt and I did a recovery talk on the effect of addiction and substance use disorder on families. And you brought up a really powerful and a really important point, and something that we don't talk about very often, and that is the experience of siblings, right? Those that have a brother or sister with substance use disorder. Um, we mentioned how there's a lot of attention to parents, right? And we talk about family members. It's almost like the automatic thought is parents or husband and wife or children, but this whole other group of folks that are siblings, right? That are brothers and sisters that that have a large effect, experience a lot of um, are affected by their loved one's addiction. So thank you for coming on. I'm wondering if you could just share your thoughts on that some.
I can give you a little background about my story first. I have two brothers with substance use disorder. I am one of four children, so I have three brothers total. And my older brother has substance use disorder, and he was 14 the first time he went into a rehab program, and I was 11. So I was pretty young, and it has been a part of my life since that point all through adulthood, and has had a really profound impact on who I've become as a person and many of my memories growing up and through adulthood. But you're right, it isn't talked about very often. And I think one of the things that attracts me to the recovery community is this wonderful community sense that there's this shared lived experience with people who are in recovery. And I think it's something that I've always felt like I'm a little on the outside of, because as a sibling, as a person who's not in recovery, I don't have the exact same lived experiences, but addiction has also impacted my life in ways that are very profound and have made me who I am. So that's a little bit of why I wanted to talk about it. Like I said, I had an older brother who was 14 the first time that I remember him going into rehab, and he just turned 40 actually on Sunday, and he's currently incarcerated, and he's had a long journey of trying to go into recovery, and his current incarceration, a lot of it has to do with mental illness as well as substance use disorder and the effects of that. And I have a younger brother who started using substances when he was around 15, which was soon after our mother died. And he had a long struggle with it. And he unfortunately passed away in 2017 due to an overdose after I think was his longest sustained sobriety. So I've been on the sidelines for a lot of what's happened. I've been on the sidelines of my older brother's journey, and then my younger brother, and through his death. So yeah, I guess I would say I listened to Lisa's talk last week about being a child of a parent with substance use disorder, and found a lot of great value in that. And she is such a positive person and has so many great perspectives. I also find myself as a very positive person. I usually try to only look at the positive side of things, but I've challenged myself to really open up and be more authentic with both sides of what we go through. So I think I have some great positives that I've received from this experience of being in a family that has substance use disorder. And some of those things are things that Lisa mentioned, like resilience and empathy and strength, and things that I don't think I would have in my life if it were not for these experiences. But there are other experiences that I think are important to talk about for other siblings out there, if they perhaps think other people haven't been through what they've been through, just to provide some of that validation. And also for parents, if you have a child with substance use disorder and also have other children who are not in recovery, just to give you some insight into what your other children may be experiencing and try to open those doors of communication. And I also thought it was important, even just for those who are in recovery, if you're in sustained recovery and you're in a place where you feel like you could have an open conversation with a sibling who has been there through your journey. And I think that could be a really difficult conversation, but one that could be very healing and helpful. But yeah, like I said, this feeling of sort of being on the outside as a sibling, when I was only 11 when this all started for me. And as a young child, you often don't understand. I don't think I had any understanding of what addiction was. I had very little understanding of even what drugs were and how people use them. I just knew that it was a bad thing and that our family was in crisis as a result of it. And so speaking to validation and shared lived experiences, I really didn't feel the first time I felt like I received real validation was actually a couple of years ago. And it was reading a Facebook post actually from an author who wrote Beautiful Boy, which later became a movie. And he reposted a comment that one of his readers wrote to him. And she was a sibling of someone with substance use disorder. And what she wrote was that as a child, she said, you learn to be small to survive as a sibling. And that was one of the most profound phrases for me because it really summarized my experience growing up. So as a sibling, I remember vividly thinking I have two options. I can either rebel and try to create attention, because as a child, you're attention seeking. And so if the family is in crisis and focused on one person, then I think as a child, your natural inclination is to try to shift attention back to yourself. So I did try to rebel once in 6th grade. I refused to do an English project and thought that I'd fail 6th grade. It didn't work out. I'm really not a rebel at heart, I guess. And so then my other option was really to do the opposite and to be the best that I could be and to cause as little commotion as I could, to just be quiet and get good grades and not cause any more chaos in the family that was already reeling from this disease that we were dealing with. And so I often would find myself just trying to be quiet so I could hear what was happening. If you're not having open conversations with your other children about what's happening, that's the only way for us to learn. So I would sit by the kitchen and try to listen to what was happening, listen to the adult conversations, and get my knowledge that way. I didn't have Google or anything, so I had no way of learning about what this all meant. And so I think some of those tendencies have continued throughout my life. So I don't know if this is true for other siblings because I don't often talk to other people who've been through the same experience as me. And but I find myself very much of a people pleaser. And I think that comes from being a child who sees my parents being in distress. And I very much wanted to fix that and wanted to do whatever I could to make it better. And so I think some of those themes have carried on throughout my life. And I have to be more conscious of it now and be conscious of when I'm saying yes to something or when I'm doing something just for that reason instead of authentically wanting to do something because I want to do it. So I would also say siblings experience a lot of stigma, and just like those of you in recovery and parents, I'm sure, get a lot of that stigma, but siblings do too. I think I was around 11 or 12 the first time I really felt that. My brother had run away from home and we had police at our house. And I remember one of my best friends at the time whose parents told her that our family was a bad influence and so I shouldn't be around her. And that's very powerful for a young child. And also just the fact that I grew up very middle class, in a very small town. And so not many people were dealing with addiction, at least that I could see outwardly. And I know from the numbers, we know how many people are living in recovery today, and we know how many people have been lost to overdose. So this is not a small issue, but it feels like it's a very small issue when you're dealing with it as a child and you don't know anybody else with the same experience as you. So I don't know.
It really sounds, what's that?
I don't know if you have any questions or if you want me to keep talking.
It really sounds like so much of your childhood and really into adulthood has been dealing with crisis, and those experiences, even though, right, like you're not the one going through substance use disorder, it is so traumatic, right? And being a child and not understanding. And also, when you were 11, the stigma was so great on families. Addiction wasn't talked about. And there was this idea like the family is bad, right? It's something the parents are doing, it's something the siblings are bad. There wasn't an understanding of the disease model. And there's a lot more awareness, but it doesn't take away from the experience, right? It's this idea of having to shrink, like losing yourself, being invalidated, being shunned by your friends, right? And how do you, who do you explain your situation to, or how you're feeling, or where you're at? You're sort of silenced in your pain, and I'm hearing just so much like invalidation. I talked about, I mentioned trauma, and I'm a big advocate for working on doing some trauma work, working around the pain that we experienced, and people think about trauma as in different ways, right? You think about combat related, you think about like sexual assault, some really significant traumas, but trauma is, it could be anything and everything. There are everyday, ordinary traumas. When you were younger, a friend rejected you or someone made fun of your family, right? Significant trauma of seeing your brothers going through substance use disorder. And it starts to frame the lens that you see the world through. Somehow maybe you're not good enough. Somehow maybe like you're not doing enough. If you were just better, right? If you were better at school, if you were quieter, if you created less problems, somehow these things might get better and be resolved.
Right. And I know the first week that you did this talk, you guys brought up like burnout from people working in the field. And
Mhm.
I mentioned in the comments, I think families experience the same kind of burnout because this can last for so many years. And I think we go through a variety of emotions where, like, for a long time, you may have a lot of hope and you believe that recovery is possible. And then you'll go through a period where you are tired and you don't know what else to do. And I think that applies to both parents and to siblings and to children of those who have substance use disorder. So there's a lot of and I think there's a lot of guilt. And it's one of the things I've never been able to have a conversation with my brothers about this. James, obviously, because he passed away, and Mike just isn't in a position to have these conversations. But I think that if you have a sibling, I think it's really interesting to look at both sides. And I think there's a lot of guilt on both sides. So I think I have always been afraid to broach such a conversation because you don't want to add more guilt to someone who already feels guilty that they've caused pain to their family, right? I mean, I don't blame my brothers at all for my experience. I think that substance use disorder is a disease. I think it is out of their control, and we've all done the best that we can. But I think just being able to see both sides and see that, like, the sibling has guilt too. And I also think there's feelings within siblings of like my brother and I were very close in age, and so we have a lot of love and a lot of connection there, but there's also feelings of resentment that I think have gone both ways in our past that come on his end, looking in and seeing I remember, like, you're always so perfect and it's not fair. And on the other side, from my end, feeling resentment, like, you're hurting our parents and, you're making all of these choices that are impacting our family, which as an adult, you can look back and say, like, they weren't really conscious choices. And
Mhm.
I just think conversations like that between families could be really helpful. And I'd love to hear if anyone's had them. I haven't experienced them myself, but I think that they could be really helpful. I look at it through a different lens now that I'm an adult than I did as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a good point. Communication is key and it's so important. And I know we have some listeners. I want to shout out some folks who joined us. It's Kendall and Lynn and Betsy, Danny. Welcome you guys. 12 Steps to Sober Leisure. Lindsay, I put up some of the comments. Lindsay says she's so proud of you and you're amazing. And I couldn't agree more. You've been an incredible supporter of recovery, an incredible advocate for siblings, and for other communities, right? Other communities like the deaf and hard of hearing communities that just aren't talked about, right? Like there's not enough attention, there aren't enough resources. In many ways, it's the forgotten communities, the definitely underserved in many ways in terms of recovery support. And we'd love to hear from the folks that are tuning in, their experience with, as Mandy said, the conversations, the family conversations, experiencing being a sibling affected by substance use disorder, and this idea of like, what can I do, right? Complete and total powerlessness over the situation. Am I right? Am I wrong? How do I fix this? And that's a really hard thing for families deal with. And it's a hard thing to wrap your mind around because there's not a right or wrong way. And it's like Mary Jo said, your feelings are 100% valid. They're real, your anger and resentment. There's no shame. There's no fault in feeling those things. Your love, your acceptance, your encouragement. There's no shame in feeling those things. We throw around a lot of times this word of enabling, and it has such a negative connotation. Enabling puts blame on the individual that's just loving and supporting the person in their life, right? And I would offer up and maybe challenge folks to look at that word and find other ways to maybe implement reinforcing behaviors that may be ineffective, right? That may be another way to kind of reframe it. Because to say, that's the wrong way to approach someone, well, what works for me, right? Recovery is the same way. What works for me might not work for the next person. And it's the same in families. I know with my experience with a significant other, right? And it's obviously not a sibling, but there were situations where I was angry and I created distance, and situations where I try to encourage and support, and this was like this roller coaster of approaches and roller coaster of emotions. And ultimately, there's not one way to navigate this world of substance use disorder, both for family members, siblings, children, and as well as the individual in recovery. Um, they're just some, very intense experiences, and I just so wish there was a handbook, right? I wish there was a communications manual.
Well, I think one of the great things in the recovery community now are peer supports and peers who've been there and are helping people navigate this whole recovery world. And I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's starting for families too, right? That there's more family supports and family peer supports, which I think would have been incredibly valuable for our family. And I don't think we had that at the time, but I can definitely see the value in someone being able to turn to another family who's been there and give them some guidance as to what worked and what didn't work, and knowing that it might not work for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. There are family recovery navigators, and we have such a program here in Rochester. And more recently, there's the certified peer recovery advocate with a family designation. specific to providing peer support to families. So there's definitely help out there, and there's just not enough attention being paid to it, right?
Yeah.
I know oftentimes, even myself, people reach out to me, or situations in my life, someone reaches out to me about, how do I help my family? Where do I go? And if I run into roadblocks, so if I run into roadblocks as someone that's kind of, active in the addiction recovery world, active with service providers, I can't imagine how families and kind of the lay public is trying to navigate this incredibly complex world.
Right.
And I see. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I would encourage family members who are unsure about coming to a place like recovery to know that they are welcome in those spaces, and that it can be
Mhm,
a comfort to be around other people who may not have had the exact same experience as you, but understand substance use disorder. And
mhm.
um, I think I found a great comfort in being around people from recovery.
And I'm so, so very glad, and so I'm just grateful that you joined our little family and have been such a important part of it. And I love that you said, it's inclusive and supportive, because as you know, we don't differentiate. We don't say, oh, you're a family member versus, oh, you're someone with substance use disorder. We're all one and we're all in it together. So definitely, we do get inquiries about, I don't have substance use disorder. Can I join your group? And the answer is always absolutely. We're here for all, right?
I remember
Um,
it at the
mhm,
beginning. I was very, very nervous about meeting anyone. I'm very shy when
mhm.
it comes to new people and new experiences, and I contacted you out of the blue and ended up meeting at a coffee shop for the first. It was for one of the 5K meetings, and it was before the center was created. And I was terrified to go in, but people were extremely friendly and very open. And I just, I would encourage people to not be fearful of that.
Thank you. I'm so glad you joined us. And it takes a lot of courage, right? For anyone to walk into a new situation, and especially when you think of like, oh, this sober community, well, maybe I don't belong, right? And that first time walking through the doors, there's a lot of fear around it. So I definitely commend you. I know it takes a lot of courage. We've actually chased people into the parking lot that have come to the door and then walked away. And I know one of our folks, Mike, that was his experience, and he's Mike Downey, and he's been an incredible member ever since. And he shares that story. So definitely so glad you joined. And there's a comment about we need some sibling anonymous meetings. Um, and I really like that because I think, and we had right before the kind of shutdown, we had a sibling survivor meeting for siblings as a whole, not just addiction. And unfortunately, I think there's just the shutdown happened, right? And there were some staffing changes that affected it. But I wonder about starting something back up, having some volunteers that want to create, like our mom support group for moms affected by a loved one's addiction came from someone approaching us and saying, hey, I want to start this group. And that's how the sibling survivor group too. So I wonder about getting something going again.
Yeah.
Um, Betsy mentioned me and my family have been very active in being educated on our disease, reading so much about addiction, wanting to understand and connect. Um, all of us are really committed to understanding. And I think that's so important, right? Education, awareness for families to understand that it's a disease, to understand that they didn't do anything wrong. There's this phrase I heard, it's like the three C's, I want to say. I heard it at a mutual aid meeting. And it's you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. And hearing that was incredibly profound because there's so much like freedom in that. It takes away the blame, it takes away the shame, because it's not the family's fault. It's just not. And education is really imperative in that.
Yeah, I think even
Yeah.
just having the internet now is
Um,
probably a big help for people who are looking for more information about it and being able to connect with all the resources we have available now. I think we're making progress and it's not perfect, but definitely we've come a long way from where we were.
I agree. I definitely agree. We've come a long, long way. And we have a long way to go. But that's how change happens, right? Sometimes a little at a time. And we've just been committed to recovery, but you too, committed to spreading the message about addiction recovery and educating and sharing your story. You've also shared your story. We had our 1 year kind of center anniversary, and you got up and shared your story and your experiences, and it was incredibly powerful. I know myself and really most of the crowd, we were in tears just listening to your strength, right? To your experience with loss and sadness, but also your strength and being able to get up there and tell and share, a bit of your heart. I just really, really appreciate you
Thank
so
you.
much. I'm really glad to have you. I'm so glad you brought up the topic of conversation, 2 weeks ago when we were on with Matt. Um, I think it's a super important conversation to have.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I don't know very many people who are siblings of those with substance use disorder, only because I know how prevalent it is. And I know addiction is very common, and I'm surprised that I don't know very many people who have been through my experience. I do know a few people who've lost a sibling to an overdose, but I think, and I don't know if we don't know of those people because of stigma and because they don't want to come out and talk about some of the experiences that they've grown up with. But I think the more we open up in forums like this and we talk about it and normalize it, then the better it will be, and maybe people will feel more comfortable.
Absolutely. I wonder if siblings feel like their experience is invalidated, right? They're just a sibling, this idea of just a sibling. But I know a number of folks that have a sibling with substance use disorder or have lost a sibling. And now that we're talking about it, I'm wondering, I know there's a comment about because you have so much free time to take on kind of part of this sibling support or sibling mutual aid work. But I do wonder about getting some folks together to just connect and share their experiences.
Yeah.
Maybe something that's we could talk more about and get your feedback on. You're involved in. I don't want to volunteer you for anything.
Yeah, we can definitely
Yeah.
talk about it.
That would be great. It's so good having you on. Thank you so much for reaching out. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and share your story and really, even through your pain, the hope of recovery for siblings. You know,
Absolutely.
um,
I was just going to say, I don't want to leave it on a negative note because it isn't all negative. And just like
mhm,
recovery, there are ups and downs. And I think I'm much more resilient for everything that I've been through and for seeing everything my brothers have gone through. I think it has made me a stronger person watching them, um, fight some of the battles that they fought and come out on the other side. So I just want to say it's not all bad. There are definitely positives to being in a family with substance use disorder, and there's nothing that people should feel ashamed of about talking about it.
absolutely. And you've been so empowered, right? Like you've been so empowered and you've grown so much to share that message with other people. So it's so important to have these conversations. And like you said, it's not all bad. There is a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain for people with substance use disorder, and there's just as much pain for family members and siblings and children and loved ones. And we need to really pay attention to each one of those groups because their experiences are different. Just saying experience of families sort of negates all these different roles and dynamics. So I really appreciate you pointing that out. I see.
Absolutely.
I think this video is going to be shared quite a bit. I think your message is really going to reach a lot of people and help a lot of affected siblings, right?
Yeah, I think it's just important for families and parents who are dealing with it. I think parents go through a really difficult time. Obviously, there are lots of decisions to be made, and it's like we had said before. It's often feels like you're in crisis mode, and
Yeah.
just to keep in mind that your other children are there watching, and to be able to have open conversations with them about what the family is going through and the decisions that you're making, because it is a place of very little power to be as a child or as a sibling, to not be able to make those decisions and to not be included in the conversations that surround those decisions.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for that bit of advice and guidance. We really appreciate it. I know the people that are watching this feed, that are going to be watching this feed, really, really do appreciate that piece of advice and you as a person as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. So we're going to wrap it up. Make sure to share the video, tell your friends, tell those that may be experiencing substance use disorder in their sibling, right? Especially in their family, but in their sibling or for their sibling. And we hope to have more. We hope that this is the beginning of a lot more conversations around bringing attention to sisters and brothers and siblings affected by a loved one's addiction. So thank you, Mandy. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend, which is just around the corner.
Yes. Have a great
Thanks,
weekend.
everyone. You too. Bye, Mandy.
Bye.
Bye.